So now that we've gotten down our routing, controllers, actions, and areas, well, actually we start to, need to write some HTML. I mean, at this point, if I right-clicked and hit View Source on our index page, we're literally just getting back the text "Hello World." There is no HTML. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we can't go into controllers, posts, and instead of returning content "Hello World," I can return content h1 "Hey there." I can do that. I hit refresh, come back here into my page, and hey, look, I now have some HTML. But obviously, this doesn't scale. We're not going to be writing all of our view logic as little strings inside of a content invocation. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to be taking advantage of Razer. Now, Razer is simply a templating language. It's actually very, very interesting. It's really cool. What it does is Razer allows us to write HTML and C# at the same time. Now, if that doesn't make any sense.
You can do that?
Oh, yeah. Let's check this out. Okay. First thing I'm going to do is instead of returning content, I'm going to return view. Now, you notice view is red. That's actually Resharper coloring view red. That's not actually a compiler error. If I hit F6, it still compiles. Resharper is smart enough to say, you're returning a view, but if I hover over this, there is no view index. So it kind of gave away a spoiler for what I'm about to ask, what's going to happen when I come back to the page and hit refresh.
404 error.
Actually,
server error.
I think it's a 500. It's a 500 or 404, but the message itself says the view index or its master, I love that, was not found, or no view engine supports the searched locations. The following locations were searched. This is very important. Remember how I said that it doesn't matter where you put your models or your controllers, but it does matter where you put your views?
Indeed.
That's because ASP.NET MVC automatically has a default path that it searches for based off of conventions to locate the view file that is going to render when a controller returns a view. Now, another thing, notice this little tilde?
Uh-huh.
Whenever you see that tilde, that means it's looking at the root of our application. So tilde/views looks for this folder right here. That's what the tilde means. It means the root.
Okay.
So you'll notice that it searched for views, posts, index.aspx, ascx. It searched for views shared index aspx, ascx. It searched for views post index.cshtml, vbhtml, and then it searched for views shared index chhtml and views shared index.vbhtml. So what are all of these files? Well, these files are the current valid locations and extensions for a view that is supported by the view engines that are loaded into ASP.NET MVC for this project. ASPX and ASCX are web form views, or ASPX views. We're not using that view engine. It's still searching for them, but we're never going to fulfill this particular search path.
Yeah, because we wanted Razer.
Right. So we want to use Razer. We want to use the CHHTML and VBHTML. So remember how I said Razer allows you to intersperse C# code into HTML code?
Mm-hmm.
It also works with VB. So you could also intersperse VB code or Visual Basic code with HTML. That's why Razer supports two extensions, CSHTML and VBHTML. We're going to be focusing on the CSHTML. So we've now narrowed down our paths to two: views shared index CSHTML and views posts index.cshtml. Notice something interesting about this?
It's all dark magic.
Well, besides that. What's interesting is that it's searching based off a convention. It's searching based off of the name of the controller and the name of the action. So, posts is the controller and index is the action. It also searches under the shared folder, minus the controller. So that means that we don't want to do it in the shared folder, otherwise we wouldn't be able to differentiate between different actions that are similarly named between controllers. We want to insert it into this file. This is the file we want, and hopefully the reasons why we're ignoring everything else are clear.
Yeah, they are even to me, so they to the brilliant people watching this, it should be pretty easy.
All right. So that's the location we want to put our view. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go into Views. I'm going to create a new folder called Posts. Inside of Posts, I'm going to right-click, hit Add, and I can go ahead and just add a new view by right-clicking and hitting View. Alternatively, I could hit Control Insert to add a new view. This Control Insert is added for me by Razer or Resharper. I'm going to show the way to do it with Visual Studio first. Just right-click, New View. I'm going to call the view name Index because that's going to correspond to the file name. Remember, that's the file name that we want this to show up as.
Yep.
We want to use Razer CSHTML. We're not going to worry about strongly typed views yet. We're not going to worry about layouts yet, so I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm going to hit Add. What we get is our first Razer file. This is Razer, and we know it's Razer because it's a CSHTML file. Now, if I were to go ahead and build, come back here and hit refresh, look what we get. A blank page. But it's not actually a blank page, because if I have a view source, we get this, which corresponds to what we're looking over here on the left. However, you'll notice something missing. What's missing from the view source that's sent to the browser that's in Visual Studio? There's something missing.
The layout null at the top, but other than that...
Yep, that's important. Remember
Okay.
how I said you can intersperse C# code with HTML code?
Yes.
This right here, this block is C# code. C# code is processed on the server. It's never actually sent to the client. So in that way, we can use C# to generate our HTML that's sent to the browser. We denote what the difference between C# code and HTML code with the @ sign. In this case, we are opening up a block. This block can contain any arbitrary C# code we want. It's not going to do anything, but that's valid.
Okay.
Okay, so here's our index.chhtml. You'll notice that it is a complete HTML file with the correct document type and even a viewport and a title. It doesn't have anything in it yet. So in here, we can place whatever we want. We can say posts index. I'm going to delete this parent div. I don't like it. And then let's just show a couple simple things. Let's show an if statement. To do an if statement, obviously HTML doesn't have if statements. HTML is a declarative language that only lets us write data. It doesn't allow us to add logic. So we would write the if statement in C#. How do we open up C# code? The @ symbol. What do I want to do? Let's do an if statement. Let's do an if true statement. So I'm going to say if true, then I'm going to open up curly braces and say something like, I don't know, text true is true, which it is. And if I come back here and hit refresh, we notice two important things. Actually, there's three important things. There's a lot of important things. Let's talk about the important things. The first important thing is I did not have to hit F6 in Visual Studio. I did not have to hit F6 in Visual Studio because the views are not actually compiled by Visual Studio. They are compiled by the web server. By modifying the view, I do not have to tell Visual Studio to recompile my DLL. Remember, if you modify .cs files, you have to recompile by hitting F6. If you modify CSHTML files, you do not, because those are going to be automatically reloaded by our web server. So instead of hitting F6 in Visual Studio, I could just jump over here and hit refresh. Second important thing is our true is true. I mean, obviously, if true is always going to execute because true is indeed true. If it wasn't true, then, well, we would have problems.
The entire world would break.
Exactly. Funny story. In C++, you can actually define true to mean false. That's a valid language construct. It's just a funny prank you can play on people by sneaking one of those declarations in somewhere in their code, and then they spend hours trying to debug it. It's wonderful. Anyway,
You really are trying to break my mind now.
But so we have this. We have an if statement. We see that the if statement is not actually sent to the browser because again, the C# code is executed on the server. It's not actually sent to the browser for processing. So it doesn't display. You'll see that we open up these curly braces, which are also ignored. In fact, you can very visually see what's ignored by seeing that background of the text be set to that gray color. That means it's ignored.
Okay.
Second thing, we have the text. I don't know why I added the text. I guess I just wanted to show it work. If I said, instead of wrapping that in a p tag, I said, hey there, and came back here, we get hey there. The text is important because we are not writing that hey there on line 17 in a way that Razer would be able to understand the difference between C# and HTML code. What do I mean by that? If I remove these text blocks, what do we get?
You get an
yeah,
you get an error, yeah.
we get a compilation error. Notice how we get the error not through, well, we get it through Visual Studio because Visual Studio is smart enough to try to compile it. But if I hit F6, it still works. It still builds. We get the error, the compilation error on the browser when we try to open it up. So why is this happening? This is happening because Razer got confused. It thought that because we opened up a block, that it was going to treat this as C# and not as HTML. There's three ways to tell Razer that we are working in HTML. The first one is to open up a tag. Razer is configured in such a way that when it detects a tag, an HTML tag, it knows that we are typing HTML and not C#.
Okay.
The second way is to do what we did before with the text. The text tells Razer to go out of the context of C# and go back into the context of HTML. The third way is with @:. The @ only applies to that single line, but it has the same effect as text. It instructs Razer that we are no longer looking at C# code and that code should be treated as HTML. I think that's about it as far as the rules of Razer go. There are more, and we'll see examples of more rules of Razer. For the most part, however, Razer does have very good error messages to explain exactly why certain bits of code that look like they should work don't. And I very rarely have issues with Razer.
Cool.
So, how do you like that, Steve?
That's pretty cool. Razer's really neat.
Yeah, it's quite awesome. Okay, so now that I have my post in, I'm going to delete this because the only reason I put this in there was to show that we could put C# code in. We'll see more examples of this later. I'm going to create another view. So I'm going to go into auth. In my auth controller, instead of returning content login, I'm going to return view. Now, instead of manually creating this view, I'm going to have Resharper generate it for me. I'm going to hit Alt-Enter on the view, and I'm going to say create Razer view login. Hit Enter. Guess what happens?
It created it.
Yep. You'll notice that Resharper went out, created the auth folder, and the login.shhtml. So, ignore the model for now. We're not worrying about that quite yet. So, now we have another view. This is our login view. Let's write some code. Now, what do you think is going to happen when I go to /login?
You should have got this is the login view.
That was a trick question.
See what you do to me?
We get login. We get login because, and again, I am doing this on purpose to all you guys watching this because seriously, this is stuff that will bite you. The reason why we get our old view back is because I never recompiled after changing the controller to return view instead of content. So, hit F6, build succeeded, come back here, hit refresh, and we now get the login view.
I got you. See, you tricked me because I watched you type in the HTML code, forgetting that you had previously changed the code.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about Razer. I want a link between index.shystaml and login.shystaml. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a p tag and I'm going to say click here to log in. I'm going to mark up click here inside of an a tag with an href. And now we have a problem. What goes into the href? If you're not familiar with HTML so much, the href is the link or where the link will link to if you click on it. Now a person might say, well, that's pretty easy. You'll just say login, right? Come back here, open up the home page, click on this button, and it works. And you might be thinking, oh, that's awesome. I'll just keep on doing that. And then I tell you, no, don't. Don't. Like, seriously, do not hard code in your hrefs or your links of any kind. The reason is we want things to be changeable and maintainable down the road. Razer and ASP.NET MVC provides many, many ways to generate the URL to whatever route you may possibly be able to come up with. Let's look at those. What I want to do is instead of going to /login directly, I'm going to open up which is going to open up C# code. I'm going to type in URL, which is a static class, or no, sorry, it's not a static class, it's a property on this Razer view, dot route URL, open up parentheses, and type in login. Why am I typing in login? Well, because route URL is going to expect a named route. If you recall from my route config, my login route is named login. So I'm going to save it, come back to the home page, hit refresh, and I hover over this link. Look, it's now still points to /login, but the difference is it is now going through my routing engine so that if I ever change my routes, this link will become updated automatically.
For example, otherwise, it would become obsolete and be broken.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So that's one way to do it. The URL property has a bunch of methods on it. We can go directly to actions. We can go to routes. Actually, that's about it. But still, we can go to actions and routes. And that's really all you need. Either you're going to a named route or you're going to a specific action on a specific controller. Those are the two things that you'll need links for. There's one more way to generate a link. It has its pros and cons and is something that you might find yourself using or you might have seen used somewhere. And that is through the HTML property, which the HTML property gives us methods that generate HTML for us. So we can type in action link or route link. Now the route link will accept a variety of parameters. Do not be put off by the crazy overload list of this particular method. This is just so that there's so many permutations of things you can pass in so that it's flexible but still useful, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So the overload that we're going to be using is going to be this one right here. We're going to pass in two strings. The first one is going to be the text of the link. The second one is going to be the name of the route to go to. So I'm going to say click here, comma, login, which remember is the name of the route, to log in. Come back to my home page, hit refresh. Notice what happened. So basically, instead of creating a link manually, we're going to have ASP.NET MVC generate the actual A element for us. It still generates an A element. If we right click and hit view source, we still see that it generated the A tag for us. And it also sent it to the right URL. I most commonly use this method. I most commonly will have a tag with the href equaling the result of invoking the URL object. Typically that's because if I want to mark up other attributes on my A tag, it's easier to do. That isn't to say it's impossible to do with route link, and we'll see examples of that later, but for now, I typically go with this, and sometimes go with this, so don't freak out if you see me switching between the two ways. It doesn't really matter. What matters is we are generating the URL from a route and not hard coding it in.
Got it. With either result, you can have it update.
Right. That's the
Got
important thing. Whether or not we have ASP.NET MVC generate the HTML for us is completely irrelevant. What you're seeing right here are the examples of what are called helpers. And helpers are available through the HTML property. We can add more helpers, and we'll see examples of that as well. But you'll notice something interesting. You see this at symbol. I'm not actually opening up a C# code block like I am here. Instead, I'm saying at, and then I'm putting in an expression. The result of this expression will be printed directly into the HTML, as you've seen examples of, and immediately end the context of C#. What does that mean? Well, that means, notice how only this code is in gray, has a gray background?
Yep.
And then immediately after that closing parenthesis, it turns back into HTML because it's no longer gray in the background.
Gotcha.
That's because Razer is incredibly intelligent in knowing what's C# and what's HTML. And it's doing this because it's in an attribute and it understands the syntax.
Okay.
So what it's going to do is it's going to take the result of this method invocation and print it directly into the HTML, which is really nice of it.
All right.
Okay. So that's linking. Well, we have an issue. We have an issue of duplication. Notice how I'm completely repeating all of my HTML on both the login and index. Like as far as like my HTML head element and my body and my header and so on.
Yeah.
Like imagine if I wanted to create like a sidebar that appears on both the login page and the home view page. I would have to add that sidebar to both these views.
Okay.
That sounds
That's
problematic, right?
Yeah, it does.
Well, there's a way to handle that. Can you possibly guess what that could be?
You know I can't. You're setting me up again.
It's with our layouts. A layout is a way in Razer to create a reusable container of HTML that will allow us to inject the HTML of specific views into the HTML of our entire layout.
Well, it sounds obvious when you put it that way.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and create a layout. Inside of my views folder, I'm going to create a new namespace called shared. This again is a convention with ASP.NET MVC. Shared is picked up by some internal bits of ASP.NET MVC, but the fact I'm putting my layout in shared is actually arbitrary in this particular case. So inside of shared, I'm going to create a new view. So I'm going to hit Control Insert, and I'm going to say I want to create a Razer MVC view, and I'm going to hit Enter. The name of my view is going to be _layout. Again, you could accomplish this by having gone to right-click shared, hitting add, and saying view. It's just a little slower. If you have Resharper installed, I highly encourage you to take advantage of Control Insert. Okay, I'm going to remove the model. I'm going to leave the layout equals null. I'm leaving the layout equals null because layouts can actually be nested. Layouts can have layouts. Can have layouts, can have layouts, can have layouts. So I want this layout to be the top level layout. So I'm explicitly telling it do not use any other layout at all.
Okay.
So then inside of it, we have our HTML document. We start off with our doc type, just like usual, our HTML5 doc type. We have our HTML element, our head element, our body element. That's all pretty standard HTML-y stuff. So the first question that we have to answer is now that we have our layout, how do we tell the layout to basically inject the result of the views of our particular actions? Well, that's actually very easy to do. Let me first toss up a little bit of code. I'm going to say header h1 simple blog, right? So this is the content that I want to appear on every single page.
Okay.
It's simulating my sidebar example, basically. So let's say I want my, say I want to insert my view here. What do? Well, open up the @ symbol and say render body. That's it. The render body method will actually go out and put the result of the view into where it appears. So I'm going to delete that line. I'm going to go back up to index. And I'm going to have index now take advantage of the layout by setting its layout property. Remember that this particular layout is not being used by anyone yet. It's just a file sitting on my disk. I'm not telling anyone to use it. So let's tell someone to use it. I'm going to say layout equals relative root views shared underscore layout.cshtml. I'm going to come back here to my page. I'm going to refresh and look there.
Simple blog. Beautiful.
But we have a problem. Watch what happens when I view source. So we're good. This is our layout code, right?
Okay.
Then this is our view code. We have another doc type and another HTML and another head and body. Obviously that's not valid HTML. So what we want to do is, now that this stuff is being handled by our layout, I want to delete it entirely from my index.cshtml file. So now our CSHTML file looks like this. It just has the content that I want to appear inside of the layout. If I come back here, it'll appear the same. But if I view the source, we see that we no longer have a repeated HTML and doc type and body and head.
Very nice. Much cleaner.
Yep. And significantly more actually valid. Because the other one would have, like, I mean, browsers, they have a saying, be conservative with what you produce and liberal with what you accept. Browsers tend to be very liberal with what they accept, insofar as they will take mangled, horrible, broken, invalid, unstandard HTML and still try to make sense of it. That's why it still looked fine when we showed up on the actual page, but when we viewed the source, it was all broken. Yeah.
And the further you go, the more likely it's not going to look fine.
Yeah, most likely. But yeah, so here's our index.cshtml file now using a layout. But our login doesn't use a layout. If I go to /login, we have this is the login view, but we're not using the layout. Now, there's two ways we can do this. We could go into login and change this layout equals to, well, our layout. Or we could do something better. I don't want to specify the layout manually for every single view I'm going to be putting into the front end. That is annoying. I want to effectively set up a default layout that's used for everyone, except for if it's overridden for whatever reason. To do that, I'm going to click on Views. Not Shared, not Post, not Auth, Views. The same folder that contains our web.config. I'm going to right-click, say Add View, and I'm going to call it, the name is important. This is important. It has to be this name or it's not going to work. Underscore View Start. And I'm going to hit Add. Then I'm going to delete all the HTML out of the View Start and leave the layout. The View Start is now going to be ran before every other view that's in a subdirectory of the folder the view starts in. Meaning, I can run arbitrary C# code now before my layouts are ran, which is nice, because I can now go into index.html, grab my layout path. I'm just going to copy it, and then I'm going to delete the layout definition entirely. I'm also going to delete the layout definition entirely out of login. And then I'm going to go into view start, and I'm going to say layout equals, and I'm going to set it to the layout that I want, my layout.cshtml under shared. The effect that this will have is that now every single view by default will indeed have the layout.
That is really sexy.
Yep. So I no longer have to worry about setting the layout manually. That being said, I am always free to override the layout on a per view basis. Also, I'm going to remove all this extraneous HTML out of login, because obviously this is going to break everything. Or not break everything, but it's going to be completely invalid. So, whoops. Now we have index and we have login. And they both work. And that's really cool. Let's go ahead and do another fun thing. I'm going to go into my layout.cshtml. I want to add a link to both login and index that is available on the entire site. To do that, inside of my h1, I'm going to add an a tag, and I'm going to set its href, so url.route URL to home. Then underneath it, I'm going to create an ahref with the URL route URL to login with the text of login. To be consistent, I'll keep these route names lowercase. So now if I come back into my page, because these two links are now available on the layout, they'll appear on both pages, and I can now navigate successfully between the two.
That's very cool.
Yeah, starting to feel like an actual website.
Yeah.
Okay, there's two more things we need to talk about with Razer really quickly before we move on. There'll be more stuff we'll play around with Razer later, but I just want to get the bare minimum out of the way. The first thing is a Viewbag. Now, a Viewbag is an interesting concept that effectively allows me to share data between views or between controllers and views. Now, we're not going to be using the Viewbag to share data between controllers and views for a while, and even then it's going to be a very limited instance, because the nature of the Viewbag is very flexible. And because it's very flexible, it's very difficult to reason against and causes problems. I see a lot of people who use the Viewbag to communicate between controllers and views, and their code becomes very difficult to maintain. I find one of the best things you can use the Viewbag for, however, is communicating information between views. What's interesting about the way Razer works, so I'm backing up just a tiny bit into some theory, is that the login.cshtml file and the index.cshtml file are actually entirely executed before it even gets to the layout, meaning that any code that I write inside of either of those views will be ran before the code gets to running layout, despite the fact that it might appear as if the opposite is true. It might appear that our child action is being ran after our layout, but the opposite is true. The child action is ran first, the input is cached, then the layout is ran, and then it's plugged back into the layout. So why does that even matter? It matters because I can use the child view to override or set parameters that the layout can then pick up on. For example, I'm going to set some data in the Viewbag. So what am I going to do? Well, first of all, I'm going to open up a C# block. Again, that's done with the @ symbol and curly braces. Then I'm going to say viewbag.title equals posts. It's important to note that Viewbag is dynamic. If you're unfamiliar with the dynamic keyword in C#, it basically means that this particular property has the type of dynamic and can take essentially any data or any property or method invocation into it. It's not statically typed. So the fact that I called this particular property title is arbitrary, just so long as when I go to access the title, I use the same name. I could have called this ASDF, and then I could access it through ASDF. But in this case, I'm just saying title. And I'm setting it to equal the string literal posts. Now remember, this view is executed before the layout, which means if I use the result of Viewbag title inside of layout, it'll be set to whatever the child action set it to, or null if the child action set it to nothing. So how do I take advantage of that? Well, if I go into layout.cshtml and I look at my title tag, what I want is I want the child view to determine what the title of the page should be. So I'm going to say @viewbag.title-simple-blog. Because of the space right there, Razer went from the C# context into the HTML context. So as you can see, remember, if it has a lighter gray background, that means it's C#. If it doesn't, that means it has HTML.
Okay.
So what I've effectively done is I'm now using the variable that I'm setting inside of my login or my index.cshtml to set something inside of the layout. And I will also do the same thing with login. I'm going to come up to login. I'm going to open up a C# block at the top. Then I'm going to say viewbag.title equals login. So what I'm showing here is an example of how to move data between your different views and your layouts. If I come back here into the page and refresh, look what happened. The title is now posts-simple blog. If I go to login, the title is now login-simple blog. That's because the individual views are setting that viewbag parameter, and that viewbag parameter is then being picked up by the layout. So in this way, we can effectively configure the layout to do something on a per view basis, which is a very powerful technique.
I like it.
Okay, there's one more thing we need to do. You ready?
I don't believe there's only one more, but okay, let's go.
Well, this is all interesting and stuff, but we have a problem. This problem is typically addressed by many different layout engines in the form of what are called sections. Now, we're not going to have any JavaScript or CSS quite yet in our project, but since this video is all about Razer, I do want to talk about a technique that allows us to insert scripts appropriately into our website. Now, if you guys recall from Web Development 101, where do we put our script tags? We put them at the end of our body. Because remember, script tags are blocking unless they're asynchronous, but not all browsers support that, so we want to put them at the end of our body. Which means that, what if login.cshtml had a JavaScript had some scripts on it, right? Like we wanted to have some like inline JavaScript or a reference to another JavaScript file inside of login.cshtml, but we want that script tag to appear at the bottom of the body. In fact, I can make this a lot more explicit by adding a footer to my website. I'm going to say footer. I'm going to use the copyright HTML entity. And then I'm going to do datetime.utcnow.year. And I'm going to sign off with me. If I come back here and hit refresh, we now have our footer that is now lower than our main content, right?
Gotcha.
So if I go into index.cshtml and let's say I wanted to add a script. I want to add a script that says alert, hi. Terrible script, and you typically don't want to insert inline scripts, but you know what? This is a great example of why we should use sections, so I'm going to roll with it. If I come back here and hit refresh, we see that hi does appear, which is nice. But if we look at the source code, we see that the script is actually inserted where we would expect it to be inserted. Right after this view, or right at the end of where the child view is rendered. But it's not being put where it needs to be put, which should be right before the body tag, but after the footer. So we want to effectively move this script from here all the way down to here. Well, to do that, you might think, oh, well, I'll just use the viewbag. Well, there's actually a much better way in this particular instance to do this. Those are called sections. A layout section is effectively another render body. That one view can satisfy both the body and multiple sections, which is really cool. So I can go back to layout. Let's say I want all my scripts to appear after footer. I'm going to say render section scripts. I'm going to do capital scripts. And I'm going to set required to false because I don't want to force views to have to implement this section. So I'm saying render section scripts false. Now, that's actually not going to affect anything. If I refresh on my view source, we see that the same thing is still appearing there and nothing is appearing after footer.
Okay.
That's because I didn't actually go back into my view and tell this code to appear in the script section. To do that, I simply have to say @section and then section name scripts. Inside of these curly braces, whatever code I put in there will actually be stuffed into this render section and not the render body. So if I go back to index, I can take the script, cut it, paste it, so that it now appears within these two curlies. If I come back to my page and hit refresh, we now see that our script jumped places. It's no longer at the end of the view. It is now in a completely isolated section that is rendered at a different location inside of the layout. So now our scripts are properly at the bottom of our page as they should be. Unless you really need a script in the middle of the page. I mean, that happens sometimes, but it's incredibly rare.
All right, sweet. That's very cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from still inserting scripts wherever you want. But this says that, okay, so this is going into the script section. It's important to note that the location of the section is completely irrelevant. In fact, I can cut this section and put it all the way at the top of the file, and it'll have the exact same effect.
Now, why is that?
That's because the section, what it's doing, think about it this way. The section is like a variable. It's defining something, but it isn't necessarily doing anything with it. We're saying we're sectioning off a part of this view and giving it a name. The rest of the view, the part that isn't sectioned, is referred to as the body. The thing that is inside of this declaration of section is inside of a section.
So by the mere fact that we declared a section, it doesn't matter where you put it in there.
No, I can put it anywhere.
Gotcha.
I can put it in the...
Gotcha.
Not that this would look very good, and I don't recommend doing this, but I can put it in the middle of it. That just gets confusing, though, because at that point you would expect it to be in the middle, but it's not, because it's going to be yanked out and stuffed somewhere else.
Gotcha.
And then remember, where the section is displayed is determined in my layout by render section scripts. If I didn't have render section scripts in here, actually I would get a compiler error because the section wouldn't exist. Alternatively, I could place this render section scripts anywhere in the layout that I want. I could even put it in the head tag, and it would basically take this and just effectively stuff it wherever I have this code in.
All right, so that's what's determining that it shows up at the bottom.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Now we can have lots of fun with sections. We'll create another section later down the road for our meta tags. Alrighty. So how are you feeling?
My brain's ready to explode, but I'm hanging with you.
There's one more thing I want to talk about, and that's an actual reason to ever open this file up. The web.config. Remember how I said that we have this web.config right here at the root of our project, and this is our configuration for the entire project? And then, I'm going to close all my windows, by the way. And then we have another web.config in each one of our view folders. This web.config effectively is telling ASP.NET to use Razer. In fact, we see an example of that right here, of configurizing Razer. But it has another purpose. Notice how we can just do URL dot. What is URL? Let's click on it and let's hit F12. Resharper comes with a decompiler, so I'm able to look at the definition. URL is a property. That's actually not what I wanted to prove just yet. I accidentally did URL. I should have done datetime. Whoops. All right, we're going to layout. What's datetime? Datetime is a class. It's a class. It's not a property. It shouldn't be accessible. From the way we know C# works, it technically shouldn't be accessible unless we had a using system somewhere, because the datetime class is inside of the system namespace. It's important to understand that in this particular case, the system namespace is actually included in Razer itself. It's not configured here. But it's important to know that Razer has its own version of using statements to import namespaces. And if you want to access a class that is not in the using statements that are generated by Razer, then, well, you have to add it. You either have to fully qualify the name, or you have to add it to the web.config here so that you're able to access it. Notice how this already includes routing, MVC HTML, MVC AJAX, and MVC, meaning that we have access to all of the types declared in these namespaces inside of our Razer files. But if we wanted a custom class accessible within our Razer file, we would either have to fully qualify it or add a using statement in here. Again, these are effectively using statements, just like we have in our normal C# files, except for they are obviously different looking. Okay, so that was really, really fun. Razer is amazing. We're going to see some more tips and tricks with Razer. I just want to end this video with one quick note. For all you guys who don't like magic, like me, not Magic the Gathering, I love Magic the Gathering, who don't like actual black magic. Um,
Which all of this has been, but okay.
well, let's remove a little bit of that magic. This is just something fun I wanted to do. It wasn't even the lesson plan, but I'm going to throw it in anyway because it's fun. I'm going to purposely cause a syntax error in my Razer view. I'm going to go back, I'm going to refresh, and look at the error. Now, the error actually isn't important. The reason I caused an error is because I wanted to show you the complete compilation source. If I open this up, this is going to blow your mind.
I'm ready.
This is a class. Look at its name. Page, views, posts, index, HTML. Look at what it does. It effectively prints out all of the code that I had inside of it. We can see that, yeah, see here's my to login. Here's my, it's really hard to read this code, obviously. It's not meant to be read. Yeah, so here's my click here to log in, for example, and so on and so on. What does this mean? This means that Razer files are classes. They're taken by the Razer compiler and turned into a class that is then executed in ASP.NET. So just to demonstrate really quickly that web.config thing, notice all these using statements up here. What I could do is I can go into web.config and I can add a new one. Let's add a namespace to simple block. Now I'm going to come back here and hit refresh, and I'm going to show the complete compilation source, and look at that. We now have a using statement. So remember, what we're looking at here is CS/HTML files are turned into C# classes and then are executed. If you ever want to see the actual compiled result of a CH/HTML file, throw in a syntax error, look at the error page, and click on Show Complete Compilation Source.
That is pretty cool.
So I'm just trying to remove a little bit of magic from the Razer templating engine. If you were lost at any point during that, that's fine. That's not necessary to use ASP.NET MVC, but I'm sure there are a couple people out there who appreciate the more low-level stuff. I am going to remove this namespace, by the way. And I'm going to remove the syntax error, obviously. All right, now what do we do whenever we end a video?
We've got to commit this.
Yep. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into this. We have all of our changed files. I'm going to hit Control A. I'm going to stage them all. Then I'm going to hit the commit button. And I'm going to say added basic views and front end layout. I'm going to hit commit, go into my log, and ensure that my commit indeed made it through.
That is a thing of beauty.
Indeed. All right, guys, I think that just about wraps up this video.
Woohoo!
Yay.